The summer Mara arrived in Hallow Creek. She brought 3 boxes, a cat named Soot, and absolutely no intention of talking to anyone. She'd rented the old Devlin cottage on the edge of town, the one with the sagging porch and the overgrown lavender that nobody had tended in years. The realtor called it full of character. Mara called it cheap and far from everything she wanted to forget. Both were true. She was 38, recently untethered from a life that had quietly collapsed, a marriage, a career, an apartment in the city that still smelled like someone else's ambition. Hallow Creek wasn't a destination. It was where you ended up when you stopped making decisions. The first time she saw him, he was standing at her mailbox, not opening it, just standing there, one hand resting on the rusted post, staring down the gravel road like he was waiting for something that was never going to arrive. He was old, 70s maybe, with the kind of face that had been weathered rather than aged. Wide shoulders gone soft, a canvas jacket regardless of the heat. "That's mine," she said, meaning the mailbox. He turned. He didn't look startled, which irritated her.
I know. Used to be mine too.
His name was Edmund Price. He'd lived in the Devlin cottage for 11 years before his daughter convinced him to move into town after his second fall. He didn't elaborate on the falls. He didn't seem like a man who elaborated on much.
I just like to walk by sometimes. Force of habit, I suppose.
She should have said something dismissive. Instead, "Do you want to see if the lavender's still alive?" He looked at her for a moment. Really looked. The way old people sometimes do, like they're reading something below the surface of your face.
I know it is. I can smell it from here.
He came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that. It wasn't planned. He'd appear at the end of the gravel road around 2 in the afternoon, and Mara would be on the porch with her coffee gone cold, and neither of them would make a fuss about it. He'd settle into the spare chair she'd started leaving out, without admitting she was leaving it out, and they'd sit in the unremarkable silence of two people who were tired of performing. Sometimes he talked about the cottage, where the draft came from in winter, that the kitchen tap needed to be coaxed rather than turned, that the lavender had been planted by his late wife, Eleanor, in the second year they lived there because she'd read somewhere that it kept the wasps away. It didn't, but she'd loved it too much to admit that. Sometimes Mara talked too, not about the marriage, not yet, but about smaller things. How she used to paint before she convinced herself she couldn't. How she'd never lived anywhere with actual quiet before, and it turned out quiet was louder than she'd expected.
You start hearing yourself think. Most people can't stand it.
Can you? He considered this with the unhurried patience of a man who'd stopped rushing through questions.
I've made my peace with what I think. Took a while.
In September, she found the postcard. It had slipped behind the kitchen radiator. A small, cream-colored card with a photograph of a coastal town on the front and 4 lines of handwriting on the back, faded to the color of weak tea. Ed, the sea here is exactly what you said it would be. I forgive you for being right. I'll be home before the cold comes. Save me some of the lavender. Elmara held it a long time. Then she put it in an envelope and left it on the porch railing before Edmund arrived that Tuesday. She was inside pretending to read when she heard him go quiet. A long quiet. The kind that has weight. When she came back out, he was still holding it, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it the way younger men do. He just sat there with it in both hands, and Soot, the cat, who tolerated no one, had somehow migrated to the arm of his chair.
She found it at a market in Portugal. Sent it before she flew home. Said the stamp cost more than the postcard.
Mara didn't say anything. She poured him a coffee and sat down. They stayed on the porch until the light went gold and then gone, and the lavender breathed its quiet smell into the cooling air, and the gravel road emptied out in both directions, and neither of them had to explain a single thing. That was how it started, and how it stayed. Two strangers in a small corner of the world, not fixing each other, not trying to, just sitting at the same edge of their different griefs, close enough that it counted. By October, Mara had started painting again. Small things at first. The road, the mailbox, the lavender. Then, eventually, an old man in a canvas jacket, looking like he was waiting, and maybe, after all this time, finally not minding the wait. October in Hallow Creek arrived like a polite warning. The trees went amber and then bare. The mornings developed an edge. Mara bought a second-hand space heater from the hardware store on Main Street, and the man behind the counter told her she'd need 2 for the Devlin place, and he was right. She and Edmund had fallen into a rhythm by then, the way rivers find their channels, not by force, but by the path of least resistance. Tuesdays on the porch. Occasionally Thursdays if one of them had something to say that couldn't wait. What surprised Mara was how little it resembled what she thought friendship was supposed to feel like. There was no giddiness, no performance of enjoying each other's company. It was more like structural. The way a wall you don't notice is still holding up the ceiling. Edmund brought her things sometimes. A jar of honey from a neighbor who kept bees. A folded piece of paper with the name of a plumber she could trust. Once, inexplicably, a single paperback mystery novel with a post-it note that just said, "You'll figure it out by chapter 4, but keep going anyway." She did figure it out by chapter 4. She kept going anyway. She learned things about him in the sideways manner that he seemed to prefer, not through direct conversation, but through accumulated detail. That he'd been a surveyor for 30 years and still couldn't pass a field without mentally measuring it. That he had 2 children, the daughter in town, Claire, who worried about him visibly and vocally, and a son, Thomas, in Vancouver, who worried about him in the quieter way that put more distance between them. That he took his coffee with too much sugar and was aware this was a character flaw. That he missed Eleanor the way you miss a limb. Not always loudly, but always.
The argument happened on a Thursday in early November. It wasn't a large argument, but it was real, which is worse. Mara had been painting more seriously by then, setting up a corner of the spare bedroom as a makeshift studio, ordering proper canvas, spending evenings in a focused silence that felt, cautiously, like being herself again. She'd mentioned the painting to Edmund only in passing. She hadn't shown him any of it. That Thursday, he asked to see. No.
Why not?
It's not ready.
Ready for what?
And something in that, the gentle, unadorned precision of it, caught her wrong. I don't need an audience.
I'm not an audience.
More honest than she intended. That's not the point.
What is the point?
I don't know. And that's exactly the problem. He said nothing. The silence that time wasn't the comfortable kind. He left earlier than usual. She sat in the kitchen with soot on her lap and a hollow feeling in her chest that she recognized as the specific guilt of having been unfair to someone who didn't deserve it. She left a note in the mailbox. I'm sorry. The tap needed coaxing this morning. You were right about that, too. He left one back 2 days later.
The plumber I recommended is named Dale. He'll also fix your drafts if you ask nicely. I shouldn't have pushed.
It said nothing else. It said everything else. The following Tuesday, they were back in their chairs as if the weather had simply been bad for a few days and now it had cleared. She showed him the paintings in December. Not all of them. 6. Propped against the spare bedroom wall while the space heater ticked behind them. He stood and looked at each one the way he did everything, without rushing, without filling the space with words that hadn't earned their place yet. There was the mailbox painting, the road painting, a small one of soot asleep in the window, rendered in grays and one impossible stripe of gold. And then the larger ones, the ones she hadn't meant to paint but had anyway. The cottage at dusk from the outside, like a memory of itself. The lavender in its late-season collapse, still beautiful, still fragrant in a way you could almost smell off the canvas. And the last one, an empty chair on a porch, winter light. No figure in it, but the clear impression that someone had just been there, or was just about to be. Edmund looked at that one the longest.
Eleanor would have liked you.
Mara had been braced for something about technique, about color, about whether they were good. She wasn't braced for that. She felt it move through her in a slow wave. From what you've told me, I think I would have liked her.
She didn't suffer fools, but she had infinite patience for people who were trying.
Mara looked at the paintings, at all of them, the quiet, accumulated evidence of a person trying. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Edmund picked up his coffee cup.
Don't let it go to your head. That one of the cat is a bit lopsided.
She laughed. It came out louder than expected, bouncing off the low ceiling of the spare room, and Edmund smiled. Not the polite kind, the real kind, the one that carved deep lines into the sides of his face. And Soot woke up and glared at both of them with magnificent indifference. Winter proper arrived in January, and with it, Edmund's hip. It wasn't an emergency. Claire called Mara on a Wednesday to let her know, which struck Mara as quietly significant, the fact that Claire had her number and thought to use it. Edmund had slipped on the ice outside his front door. Nothing broken, just inflamed, badly enough that the doctor wanted him off it for 2 weeks.
He won't ask you himself, but I thought you might want to know.
Mara drove into town that Thursday with a container of soup she'd made from a recipe Edmund had described once from memory. Eleanor's potato and leek, approximate quantities, best guess, and a paperback of her own with a post-it note that said, "Don't figure it out by chapter 4. She knocked. Edmund opened the door in a cardigan and an expression that was trying to be dignified, but was mostly just relieved. His house in town was smaller than the cottage, tidier, with the specific order of a person living alone who'd refused to let things slide. There were photographs everywhere. Eleanor at various ages, young and laughing, middle-aged and squinting into Mediterranean sun, older and still with the same look of good-humored certainty in her eyes. Thomas and Claire as children, a surveying crew from what looked like the 1980s, everyone tanned and dusty and pleased with themselves. Mara heated the soup. Edmund sat at the kitchen table and provided what he called supervisory guidance, and she called unsolicited opinions.
It's close, not exact. The leak needed more time.
Then you make it next time.
My hip.
Your hands work fine. He accepted this with the grace of a man who knew when he'd been outmaneuvered. They ate at the kitchen table instead of a porch, and it was different, but not lesser. Just the same thing in a different room. Proof that the friendship wasn't about the location. It had become its own place by then, portable, weatherproof. She visited twice more that week. By the second visit, she'd noticed which cabinet held the mugs and stopped asking. By the third visit, she brought her sketchbook and drew quietly at the table while Edmund read, and neither of them needed to narrate what was happening. It was just 2 people being alive in the same room. Spring came the way it always does in small towns, not all at once, but incrementally, like a rumor gathering confidence. First the mud, then the birds. Then one morning, Mara walked outside and the lavender had sent up its first tentative gray-green shoots, and she stood there for longer than made sense, feeling something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still tight. She called Edmund rather than waiting for Tuesday. "It's coming back."
I told you it would.
"You did. You were right again."
I'm right quite often. I've simply learned not to point it out every time.
That seems like tremendous personal growth.
It's been a long life. You accumulate things.
She was still smiling when she hung up. The painting she finished that April was different from the others. Larger, more ambitious. She'd been working on it since February, through drafts and overpaints and one complete abandonment that lasted 9 days before she came back to it. It showed the porch of the Devlin cottage in spring light, the lavender in full color, almost aggressive in its purple, the 2 chairs with the ease of furniture that knows it's being used, the gravel road stretching away in the background into something soft and unresolved. No people in it, and yet unmistakably full of people. She brought it to Edmund in May, before she'd decided what to do with it. He propped it against the wall in his living room, next to a photograph of Eleanor, and stood back.
Where will it go?
"I don't know yet." A long pause. Then,
Leave it here for now, while you decide.
she left it there. And in the way of things that find their right place, it stayed. Neither of them ever formally discussed it. It simply became part of his living room, between the photo of the survey crew and the window that looked onto the street, where the afternoon light hit it just right and made the lavender look, for a moment, almost alive. The following summer, a woman from the small gallery in the next town over wrote to Mara asking if she had work to show. Someone had mentioned her name. She never found out who. She suspected Edmund, but he denied it with such practiced innocence that she knew it was him. She showed 6 pieces, the cottage series. They didn't sell immediately, but people stood in front of them longer than they stood in front of other things, which her artist's instinct told her was the more important measure. Edmund came to the opening with Claire, who was brisk and kind in equal measure, and who pulled Mara aside at one point.
Thank you for being his friend.
Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and hoped it was enough. On the drive back to Hollow Creek, Edmund had accepted a ride, citing his hip, though his hip had been fine for months. They passed through the open land between the towns as the sky went pink and enormous above the fields.
You should keep painting.
I plan to.
Eleanor painted. Watercolors. Terrible ones.
Another pause. The fields moving past.
She loved it, absolutely.
Mara glanced at him. He was still watching the fields go by, the canvas jacket in summer weight, hands quiet in his lap. "Is that why you kept coming back to the cottage? The lavender, the porch. Was it all about her?" Edmund considered this for a long time. Long enough that the sky had shifted from pink to a bruised and beautiful violet by the time he answered.
At first, yes. But then it became about the Tuesdays.
A beat. The Tuesdays.
You were there. That was the thing.
She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The road ran straight and quiet through the fields, and Hollow Creek waited at the end of it, and the lavender would be up when they got back, and that, all of that, was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was the whole of it.